Hello everybody, it's Justin with Shock Therapy, and we are doing an unboxing of the new Polaris RS1. We're extremely excited about this car because it's one of a kind in the industry. There's nothing else like it with a single seater and all the horsepower, so let's take a look at this car. So one of the obvious things that you see when you look at this car is the fact that it's a single seater, and there's many reasons for that. Polaris wanted to build the most agile RZR ever made, and to put a single seat in it with a center location, with your butt cheek sitting at the center of gravity, you can drive this car pretty much like you stole it and know exactly how it feels, what it's doing, what it's going to do, and you can control the car really, really well, as opposed to a wider, longer two-person car. So with that being said, let's get inside and take a look at how the interior affects the way you can drive. So the first thing that I feel when I get inside the car is I'm 6'2" and I've got plenty of room. There's plenty up above, that's for sure. You could build a really cool aftermarket cage on this car, drop it down 3 inches and still fit somebody that's fairly large. Got plenty of room in the sides. I was kind of concerned about this kind of necking in when you elbow out and go for it, that it might be a problem, but it doesn't seem to be that at all. The visual is amazing. I can see with a really slant nose on the hood. Seeing over the hood is not an issue, especially in the dunes when that might be a bit of a visual problem when you're cresting from ridge to ridge. The fenders in the front are pretty narrow, and that makes it a lot easier to look left, maybe even through these door openings. As you're coming sideways off of a dune from one crest to the next, you can look right out the door as to where you're going. Another thing that I notice is I can see the front tires, and that's a really big advantage, especially in bigger cars like sand cars in the dunes. It's really nice to see that tire. That's where you're going to head when you turn over a blind spot. And I can only imagine when you're running through the rough stuff and in the whoops and watching that tire dance around. From a shot guy standpoint, I'd love to see that. Dual brake pedal, really, really cool. I like to dual foot drive. I don't usually use my gas foot for brake. Personally, I use 2 feet. So Polaris thought about that, and I like that idea. Now, having not really driven the car very much, this is just my observation by sitting in it. But truth be told, I did drive it off the trailer to get in here, so I do have about this much time. But we'll take a look and see how this car acts with some horsepower. And as a matter of fact, now we'll talk about the power in the back. So when you get to the back of the car, obviously what we need to talk about is horsepower, trans, and drivetrain. And as most of you know, this comes with a normal Polaris XP engine package, a non-turbo 110 horsepower engine. But what a lot of people don't realize is that this car, even though it only has 110 horsepower, has almost 250 pounds less weight than a normal turbo two-seater. Turbo two-seaters are almost 1,600 pounds, and this is 1,350 pounds dry. So that power to weight ratio is huge. A turbo has about 9.5 pounds per horsepower stock. This car has about 11.5 pounds per horsepower stock. That's a very small change. It's about 15% between the two. So adding the agility of this car in with the drivability of being a single seater, I think coupling that with a power to weight ratio that I just mentioned, this car is probably a little bit quicker off the line than a turbo. It may not have the legs that a turbo does in the mile an hour, but it's going to excel everywhere in that mid-range where you drive the car the most. And I feel like the agility with this power to weight is going to be an incredible trail car where you can whip it around a tree quicker and faster than any of the other cars that are available. And maybe even in the dunes, if you have some of the tighter dunes that are not 5 stories tall, but some of the little stuff that a lot of people don't like to get big cars into, you could absolutely own those in this car. Another item that Polaris really thought forward about is that this engine package is a non-turbo engine, but the short block uses turbo short block components, meaning that it bolts directly to the turbo engine. So upgrading this is a snap. If you wanted to put a turbo engine in it, bolts right in with the exception of some firewall clearance for a turbo. There's nothing you have to deal with when it comes to changing cases or transmissions. It's easy to do. So if you wanted to add parts or get replacement parts for this car, you pretty much are going to buy turbo components and swap them out as you need, if you even need to do that. They're big enough and strong enough to not have problems with. So as we come back to the front of the car, the main thing that we want to talk about is the front differential in this car. Not only is it a turbo front diff, but it's also a new style compared to previous years. So in the past, you had an XP differential with different sprag sizes and widths, and some people have issues with breaking sprags and folding arms off the armature plate. And then there was an improvement when the turbos came out, and the turbo diff had a larger sprag and bigger bearing and a couple other things that were beneficial, and it was a good upgrade for people to put into an XP. Well, these are even bigger than that turbo diff. They're hung from the top instead of the bottom, so you don't shear hardware off when you hit rocks. The overall size of the diff is much bigger, and it has multiple armature plates in it for different actuation rates, and it takes a lot of the backlash out of the front diff. If you've seen any of our previous videos, if you look on the shelf behind me, you'll actually see one of these diffs that we've had for some time, because when these came out, it was a big jump in strength for all the race teams, and everybody wanted to jump into that as soon as they could, not have front differential problems again. That diff is standard issue in this car. There is no way the horsepower level and weight of this car could ever hurt that, so you don't ever have to worry about front differential issues in an RS1. Other things in the front end that are extremely important are the front frame components, and also control arm mounts and sway bar mounts all saw upgrades, the same upgrades that you see in a Turbo S. Extra support, extra tabbing, thicker tabs, better bushings, some hardware. Some of the hardware is still 10 millimeter, unlike a Turbo S it might be 12 millimeter, but in this car it's actually plenty. So by taking all of these drivetrain and frame improvements into consideration, it's obvious that Polaris has spent a ton of time improving all of the parts in the car so that the longevity that you will see in this car when you get into it and honestly just drive it as hard as you possibly can are going to go so much longer than previous years. I think they nailed it in the longevity department. So we could go on and on about some of the other items that are on the car, but most of those are typical XP1000 Polaris components that we all know very, very well. They've been around for many years. So we'll kind of leave that alone. But the one thing that we want to touch upon is, where does this car fit in the market? Well, it's clearly faster and lighter than almost every other XP or almost every other normally aspirated car on the market. As a matter of fact, because of its agility, power to weight, and the components being all turbo and strong, maybe the competition for this car is going to be all the turbo cars that are on the market. Well, what does that mean? It fits right in the middle of these two things, and there isn't another single-seater that can compete with it. There isn't another single-seater with any horsepower. This car is creating its own market, and I feel like the person that's perfect for it is a guy that's going to get in and get aggressive. You don't have to worry about the passenger, wife, kids, or friends that can't handle driving hard. You have less weight, you've got indestructible parts. You can just get in this thing and flog it. I think that the majority of the customers that are going to buy this car, it will be their second car. They already have one that's made the family happy. They want to get in this thing and not have to worry about carrying people with them and just turn it up. But when you bring price point into this at about a $14,000 retail, it's an incredible buy that most people could probably afford for their second car. Another thing to consider is, at $14,000 and having all of the turbo components in this car, you could throw a turbo kit on this thing for $4,000 or $5,000 at the most, be in it for $18,000 to $19,000, and still absolutely smoke some of the turbo cars that are on the market for less money. There's a ton of potential in this car. I think a lot of people are going to buy it. They're going to throw a lot of parts at it. They're going to be in it for less money than everybody else who's got a full tilt turbo car, and they're going to be faster. So now for the fun part, we get to start our testing process. I'm super excited, having only driven the car a little bit so far, to find out how agile and how much fun this thing is when you really put the boots to it in terrain that you know how to drive. So our testing starts off with running it out in the desert. We're going to run it at race pace, we're going to run it at cruise pace, we're going to go up and hit the mountains, then we're going to go to the dunes, we're going to hit some rocks, we're going to get into the trees, and we're going to do some water and mud. Our goal is to see all of the terrains that our customers see and make sure that after we've driven this car and tested it, we can develop components and parts of our kit that affect all of those areas the best. Some of the items that we're hopefully going to be throwing at this car would be spring kits, internal shock modifications, adjustable sway bars both front and rear. We're going to be building frame support kits for different mounts on the car. We're also going to be building a new rack and pinion for it, because this car uses the same rack and pinion as a Turbo S. It's a completely different design rack and pinion than the previous year XPs, which we already make a rack for. So you will see a brand new rack and pinion for this car and a Turbo S. So be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube channel, Shock Therapist, and stay tuned for more epic UTV content.
We are recording. And the clap has started.
One of the things that we're really excited to see is this car is so much lighter than most, and lighter is always better, especially with fast and agility, with fast, agile car. With off. Yeah, not really. Yeah, not really. Like the lighter the car, lighter suspension is better, lighter car is not. We can take this moment to tell everybody that it took me about 26.5 minutes to say one line. The cool thing is that we're never gonna know anything about it because Chase forgot the batteries, they were not charged, and we lost all the audio, so whew.